Imagine standing in the middle of Beijing on a perfect autumn day. Golden sunlight bounces off curved palace roofs that look like they were dipped in honey. Crimson walls stretch for miles, so bright they almost hurt the eyes. Tour guides smile and tell you this was the home of 24 emperors, the most magnificent palace ever built. A place of perfect harmony where art, poetry, and absolute power lived side by side for nearly 600 years. You've seen the pictures 1,000 times. Graceful women in flowing silk, delicate fans hiding shy smiles, the dragon throne glowing under lantern light. This, we're told, was the Forbidden City, the ultimate fairy tale made real. That's the story every postcard sells. That's the version school textbooks still whisper. And for centuries, the emperors wanted you to believe it so badly that they painted it on porcelain, embroidered it on robes, and carved it into jade. They built a dream so beautiful that almost nobody dared look underneath. But the dream had walls 35 feet high for a reason. Behind those same golden roofs were courtyards no tourist map ever shows. Behind those crimson gates were alleys so narrow the sun never reached them. And inside those alleys, for almost 600 years, something happened that the official records mention only in code, if they mention it at all. The palace that looked like heaven on earth kept a secret so dark that even the people who lived there spoke of it in whispers, then never spoke of it again. When night fell and the tourists went home, the Forbidden City didn't sleep. It listened. It remembered every scream that never made it past the walls. And it made sure the truth stayed locked inside with the women who vanished there 600 years. Thousands of girls. One rule written in blood and silence. What happened behind these gates stayed behind these gates until now. Your eyes for a second and picture those golden roofs one more time. Now listen. Somewhere underneath them, a heavy iron gate is slamming shut. And on the other side of that gate, the fairy tale ends and the nightmare begins. Every 3 years, the empire threw a celebration that looked like joy itself. Villages exploded with color. Red silk banners snapping in the wind, drums shaking the dust from rooftops, firecrackers screaming into the sky. Proud fathers lifted their daughters onto painted carts so the whole district could admire them. Mothers dabbed rosewater behind tiny ears and whispered that if the girl was lucky, really lucky, she might become an imperial consort. Bathe in milk, wear phoenix crowns, and bring honor to the family name for 1,000 generations. Crowds cheered as the procession rolled toward the provincial capital. It felt like a wedding, a festival, a lottery where the prize was immortality. Then the curtains closed. Behind heavy canvas tents, guarded by unsmiling eunuchs, the cheering stopped. Girls were ordered to strip. Bare feet on cold stone, they stood in silence, while old men with long fingernails circled them like vultures. Every inch of skin was examined for a single blemish, a scar, even a freckle too bold. Teeth were tapped with ivory sticks. Ears were measured against bronze templates. They pinched the throat to test whether the voice floated like a nightingale in spring. Rulers slid along, spines to confirm the girl stood, exactly 3 inches shorter than the emperor's. Recorded shoulder height. They forced the feet flat and stared at the second toe. It had to be longer than the big toe, or the girl was disqualified on the spot. One official recorded everything in a ledger, bound in yellow silk, the same color reserved for the emperor alone. Families waited outside for days. Most heard nothing. A lucky few received a red envelope with silver and the news that their daughter had failed the honor. They cried with relief. The others simply never came back. When the final list was sealed, the chosen girls, sometimes only 30 out of 10,000, were dressed in plain blue robes that marked them as property of the Department of Imperial Household. No jewelry, no embroidery, nothing to remind them of home. At dawn, they were loaded into locked carts with blacked-out windows. The road to Beijing took weeks. Some girls tried to run and were dragged back by their braids. Others stopped eating and were force-fed. Rice gruel through bamboo tubes so they arrived plump and presentable. Then came the moment every history book skips in a single sentence. The carts halted before the Meridian Gate, the only entrance to the Forbidden City. Massive red doors, 20 feet tall, studded with golden bolts, creaked open just wide enough for one girl at a time. An official read her new palace name aloud, never the name her mother gave her, then pushed her forward. The doors shut with a thud that echoed like a coffin lid. Mothers who had followed on foot for hundreds of miles pressed against the walls, screaming names that no longer belonged to anyone. Inside, the new girls stood in a courtyard, so vast their cries were swallowed whole. They thought the worst was over. They were wrong. The great doors had barely finished groaning shut when the real palace revealed itself. No golden roofs here. No silk-clad courtiers bowing in welcome. Only a line of stone-faced women in dark gray robes waiting like crows on a fence. They didn't speak. They simply pointed, "Follow." The new girls, still clutching the small bundles that held everything they owned in the world, shuffled forward. One by one, the bundles were snatched away and tossed into a brazier. Hairpins, a jade bracelet from grandmother, a scrap of cloth embroidered with a mother's prayer. Everything turned to smoke before their eyes. Names came next. "You are no longer whoever you were," the chief palace woman announced. "From this breath forward, you belong to the emperor. You have no past." They were marched through courtyards that glittered in the distance, lamplight bouncing off the tiled roofs of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, the most sacred building in the empire, then shoved down a narrow staircase lit by a single flickering lamp. The air turned damp and sour. The underground corridor smelled of lye and old blood. First came the bath. Massive copper tubs steamed with water just off the boil. Senior maids grabbed the girls by their queues and forced their heads under until lungs burned and the world went red. When they came up gasping, rough hemp cloths scraped away every trace of village dirt, every memory of home. Skin blistered. Some fainted and were revived with slaps sharp enough to split lips. In the inspection, they were lined up naked under oil lamps, while the oldest palace women, faces powdered bone white, eyes cold as winter ponds, prowled with lanterns held high. A birthmark shaped like a peach, death sentence for inauspicious omen. A faint scar from childhood smallpox, immediate removal. Fingers pried open mouths, checked teeth, measured earlobes against a carved ivory gauge. They pinched breasts to guess future shape, spread legs without warning, searching for the slightest imperfection that might displease the Son of Heaven. One girl, trembling too hard, wet herself. The head matron struck her across the face, so hard a tooth skittered across the stone. No one moved to help. Those who passed were handed coarse gray shifts and led deeper underground to the teaching rooms. Low ceilings, no windows, walls painted the color of dried blood. Here the real lessons began. Walk 50 paces holding a bowl of water on your head. Spill 1 drop and feel the rattan cane across your calves until you learn silence. Smile while the matron slaps you again and again. Let the corners of your mouth drop and the lesson doubles. Kneel on iron chains for hours until you master looking only at the floor. Never, under threat of blinding, at an imperial face. Above them, through narrow ventilation slits, moonlight sometimes glimmered on the golden roof of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, so close they could almost touch it. Down here, that same moonlight never reached. By dawn, the girls who entered as daughters, sisters, and village beauties were gone. In their place stood blank-faced shadows, who already knew the single unbreakable law carved into every beam of the forbidden city. From this night forward, death was the only way out. Picture a golden plaque hanging in the palace of earthly tranquility. 8 neat horizontal lines, each name written in perfect vermilion ink. At the very top, one woman, the Empress. Below her, 2 imperial noble consorts, then 4 consorts, 6 concubines, and on until the bottom line holds dozens of constant attendants, names so small they're barely legible. That plaque decided everything. It decided if you tasted pork or only watery rice, if your bed had brocade quilts or a reed mat crawling with lice, if you were carried in a palanquin or walked until your feet bled through paper-thin shoes. Most of all, it decided how quickly you died at any moment. 3,000 to 9,000 women lived inside those walls. Yet the emperor had only one body. Records from the Guangxu reign show he slept with fewer than 20 women in 24 years. That means 90%, sometimes more, never felt his hand, never heard his voice, never mattered at all, except as living ornaments. They were the empire's most expensive furniture. High rank was a fairy tale with a body count. The empress wore robes so heavy with gold thread that 2 maids had to hold the hem when she walked. Her meals arrived on 99 porcelain dishes. Her birthday shut down the capital. Yet she lived under constant poison rumors. Every cup of tea tasted like fear. A consort might bear the next heir and rise overnight, or give birth to a daughter and watch her allowance shrink to a few ounces of lamp oil. Lower down, the silence was louder. A noble lady received 1 tiny courtyard and 2 maids who spied on her for higher powers. First and second class attendants shared dormitories where 40 women slept shoulder to shoulder on heated brick platforms that cooked fleas into their skin. Constant attendants, the invisible majority, scrubbed floors, emptied chamber pots, and prayed the monthly stipend of 2 taels of silver arrived before they starved. Many didn't live to see 30. Palace infirmary records list sudden decline, melancholy, or simply missing beside their names. Every girl who crossed the Meridian Gate dreamed of the top line on that plaque. One actually reached it, a low-born concubine named Yehenara, who entered at 16 as a rank 6 lantern keeper. Through poison, politics, and sheer will, she clawed her way up until the entire empire bowed when she passed. History calls her Empress Dowager Cixi. She proves the dream was possible. But Cixi herself once whispered to a lady-in-waiting, "I have worn the phoenix crown, and I have counted every corpse it cost." Even the lucky ones paid a price no history textbook dares print. As the sun bled out behind the palace roofs, the Forbidden City held its breath. In the rear courtyards, eunuchs lit red lanterns and opened a slim, leather-bound book with a jade green cover, the green-headed ledger, the most guarded document in the empire. Every evening at the exact same hour, the chief eunuch approached the emperor with a tray of jade tablets, each engraved with a woman's palace name. The emperor pointed, or sometimes just flicked a finger, and the evening was decided. No words, no romance, just the quiet click of jade on lacquer. The chosen girl was stripped naked in her room, while other women watched in silence, some with envy, some with terror. A wide strip of yellow silk, the color reserved for the emperor's body alone, was wrapped around her once, knotted at the shoulders, and nothing else. No undergarments, no shoes. Then a senior eunuch hoisted her onto his back like a roll of carpet, her bare legs dangling, her face hidden against his neck so she couldn't see the route. The corridors were deliberately maze-like. No woman was ever allowed to know how to reach the dragon bed on her own. They called it respect. It looked like livestock being delivered. Inside the bedchamber, bronze mirrors reflected candlelight 1,000 times over. making the emperor seem everywhere at once, a living god deciding the fate of mortals. The girl was placed at the foot of the bed, still wrapped, and left kneeling until he gave permission to approach. The eunuch outside the door noted the exact minute in the green-headed ledger. Year, month, day, hour. When she was dismissed hours later, sometimes limping, sometimes carried unconscious, the same eunuch wrote down whether the dragon had bestowed the rain and cloud or not. Every detail mattered. A single pregnancy could topple ministers, start wars, rewrite succession. The ledger was checked every morning by the Empress Dowager herself. Most emperors took whoever amused them that night. Some, though, sent specific requests that still make archivists flinch. The Tongzi Emperor demanded girls who had not yet flowered. The Xianfeng Emperor kept a separate list of women trained for acts so violent that palace doctors later recorded internal tearing and inability to conceive again. Court painters were ordered to create private albums showing positions that no Confucian textbook would dare name. When those albums were discovered in 1924, the caretakers burned them in terror. The girl who returned before dawn was bathed again, examined for bruises that might anger a higher consort, then locked back in her courtyard. If she spoke of what happened, the punishment was strangling with a silk cord. Most never spoke again. In the morning, the empire bowed to a teenager they called the Son of Heaven, the axis of the universe, the holiest being under heaven. At night, that same holy being reduced living women to entries in a ledger of flesh. And if you angered the wrong person, an empress, a favored consort, a spiteful eunuch, there was a fate worse than being ignored. Most women in the Forbidden City didn't die dramatically. They died politely. When a girl became inconvenient, too outspoken, too beautiful, too barren, or simply in the way, the sentence was delivered with a smile and a gift. A length of pure white silk, 3 feet longer than her height, folded inside a lacquered box. Everyone understood. That night, 2 eunuchs would enter her room, bow, and wait. Refuse, and they dragged you to the courtyard anyway. The silk went over the beam. A stool was kicked away. The next morning, the ledger recorded, granted death in delicate brushstrokes, and the palace moved on. Some received a cup of medicine for their headaches. Saffron, they were told, or ginseng. It tasted metallic. Within hours, their tongues turned black, their limbs seized, and the doctor wrote, sudden illness of the blood. No autopsy was ever performed on an imperial woman. The body was washed, dressed in plain blue, and carried out before sunset. Then there were the wells, more than 40 inside the palace walls, narrow, stone-lined, and very deep. A push from behind during an evening stroll, a quickly replaced coverstone, and the records noted, slipped and fell while viewing the moon. Servants were ordered never to draw water from that well again. In 1924, when the last eunuchs were finally questioned, one old man wept and spoke of a well behind the Palace of Eternal Spring that still echoed at night, soft splashing. A voice calling a name no one had used in 200 years. The worst fate was reserved for those accused of witchcraft. A secret tribunal, no defense, a sentence read once. The woman was sewn alive into a coarse sack, carried to a pit beyond the north wall, and buried with a live rooster to peck out her evil spirit. Only a handful of cases are documented, but the pits were found decades later, skeletons curled like fetuses, finger bones shredded from trying to claw through burlap. High-ranking women, when they died, received splendor, drums, yellow silk shrouds, processions that stopped traffic in Beijing for days. Low-ranking women got a reed mat, a shallow trench near the old execution ground, and no marker. By the end of the Qing, the ditch held so many bones that dogs refused to cross it. When Pui was expelled in 1924, and the palace gates opened to curious reporters. Surviving eunuchs led police to places the maps never showed. One pointed to an innocent-looking well, now bricked over, and whispered, "That one never stopped." Even after 50 years, you could stand here at midnight and hear her crying for her mother. Thousands entered. Hundreds ruled for a season. Thousands more were erased so cleanly that even their ghosts were declared illegal. But a handful refused to vanish quietly. Most women broke. A few learned how to sharpen the pieces and cut their way out. Consort Zan of the Guangxu Emperor was one. Beautiful, educated, and unafraid, she refused to kneel when the Empress Dowager entered. Sentenced to death in 1900, she walked to the palace well in full court dress, turned to the eunuchs, and spoke the curse that still chills the archives. "I die today, but none of you will see the new century." Then she swallowed beaten gold leaf, slow, agonizing, impossible to reverse. 2 years later, the dynasty began its final collapse. Palace servants swore her footsteps echoed in the well every lunar eclipse. Others chose subtler knives. The fox spirit concubines, always low-ranked, always Manchu, were whispered to practice forbidden shamanism. They burned paper talismans under the emperor's bed, slipped cat bones into his soup, recited spells backward at the full moon. 3 emperors in the Qing line descended into raving madness, Jia Jing clawing at shadows, Daoguang screaming about foxes with women's faces, Tongji dead at 19 after nights of seeing ghosts in the mirrors. Official cause: illness. Everyone inside the walls knew better. Then there was the woman who needed no spells. She entered in 1852 as a 16-year-old lantern keeper, rank 6, named Yehainara. The selection tablet with her name was almost thrown away. Only a junior eunuch's mistake put it on the emperor's tray. She bore him the only son. When the Shanfeng emperor died 9 years later, she orchestrated a coup from behind a yellow silk screen, throat still hoarse from childbirth. Ministers who opposed her woke up dead. Empresses who blocked her path drank long life tonic. By 1861, the empire bowed to a woman who had once scrubbed floors. Cixi ruled for 47 years. She murdered, starved, poisoned, exiled. She survived 8 assassination attempts and laughed at the 9th. She dressed in submissive pastel robes while issuing edicts that toppled dynasties. When foreign photographers asked her to smile, she gave them the same gentle expression she wore the day she ordered consort, Zone thrown down the well. On her deathbed in 1908, wrapped in a 9-dragon robe heavy with pearls, she looked at the grand counselors kneeling in terror and spoke her last public words: "Never again let a woman rule the Middle Kingdom." Even she understood the price. The throne she stole was built on the bones of every girl who entered those gates believing in mercy. Some of them, in the end, made the palace pay in blood and madness. November 5th, 1924. Soldiers bang on the red gates. Pui, the last emperor, is carried out in tears, still wearing his dragon robe. For the first time in 5 centuries, the Forbidden City belongs to no one. The remaining eunuchs panic. They drag chest after chest of the most damning records, green-headed ledgers, punishment lists, medical reports describing injuries no doctor dared name, into the courtyards and feed them to the giant bronze incense burners. Flames leap 20 feet high. Black snow of half-burned paper drifts over the golden roofs. By nightfall, decades of evidence are ash. They call it protecting imperial dignity. History calls it the biggest cover-up in Chinese memory. A century later, tourists take selfies under those same roofs, while certain steel doors inside the palace museum stay locked. Red wax seals fresh dates, not to be opened before 2050 or later. Curators shrug. Some truths, they say, are still too dangerous. The hall of mental cultivation stands empty now, moonlight slicing across the dragon bed where empires were conceived and destroyed. Listen closely on a winter night, and the wind still carries something. A silk cord tightening, a splash in a forgotten well. A girl whispering a name that was taken from her. 600 years of screams silenced by fire. But some secrets refuse to stay buried. If you want the uncensored version of what Mongol warriors did to royal princesses after conquering a kingdom, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. You won't unsee the next one.